Once there was a man living quietly in a modest village, a place where days passed slowly and everyone knew each other's habits. And this man carried a constant worry in his heart because of his only son. A young boy who showed no interest in work, responsibility, or purpose, spending his days drifting through the streets, sitting in the shade, talking to people without direction, and returning home every evening having accomplished nothing, while time slipped through his fingers unnoticed. The father watched this pattern repeat day after day, and instead of shouting or punishing, he decided that understanding would be a stronger teacher than anger. So one calm morning he called his son to his side and spoke in a gentle voice, asking him to fetch an old book that rested on a shelf inside the house. The boy did as he was told, took the book, and placed it in his father's hands. The father turned the book slowly, looked at it for a moment, and then said, "Take this book to the village square and ask people how much they think it is worth." Without questioning, the boy walked through the village showing the book to shopkeepers, travelers, and neighbors. One person said it was worth very little because it looked old. Another said it might be worth more because it was well preserved. Someone else said it was useless. Others gave higher prices, lower prices, or laughed and waved him away. Every answer was different. When the boy returned home, he told his father everything, explaining how no one could agree on its value. The father listened quietly, nodded, and simply said, "Put the book back where it was." The following day, the father again called his son and asked him to bring the same book. Once it was in his hands, the father said, "Now return to the village, but this time do not ask the value of the book itself. Ask people what the knowledge inside this book is worth." The boy felt confused and uncomfortable, but he obeyed. As he walked through the village and asked his question, people reacted strangely. Some mocked him. Some said knowledge had no price. Others ignored him completely. The boy felt embarrassed and discouraged, wondering why his father had sent him on such a foolish task. At the edge of the village, he noticed an elderly teacher sitting alone, reading quietly under a tree. When the boy asked him the same question, the old man closed his book, looked at the boy kindly, and spoke with calm certainty. "Knowledge," he said, "is something you can never truly measure with money. You can lose your wealth and gain it again, but once ignorance steals your time, it leaves scars that money cannot erase. Knowledge shapes how you live, how you choose, and how you grow." The old man continued, explaining that every person is given the same number of days, but not everyone learns how to use them, and that wisdom does not come from age alone, but from how one invests effort, attention, and time into learning something meaningful. The boy listened closely, feeling something shift inside him. He thanked the old man and returned home with a new expression on his face. He told his father everything he had heard and felt. The father smiled, knowing the lesson had reached its destination. From that moment forward, the boy no longer wasted his days. He began to work, to learn, and to respect the hours given to him. He understood that time, like knowledge, cannot be owned, only used wisely. Friends, every day is a gift offered equally to all of us. What makes the difference is not how much time we have, but how we choose to spend it. Once a moment passes, it never returns. Use it with purpose. And as the days passed, the change in the boy became visible not only to his father, but to the entire village, because the same streets where he once wandered without direction now saw him walking with intention, carrying tools, books, and questions instead of excuses, greeting people with focus rather than idle chatter, and returning home each evening tired but fulfilled, feeling a quiet satisfaction he had never known before. He began waking up earlier, not because someone forced him to, but because his mind no longer felt heavy with emptiness, and in the stillness of the morning he discovered something powerful. When time is respected, it begins to work with you instead of against you, opening doors that laziness keeps locked. The father observed silently, understanding that real lessons do not announce themselves loudly. They reveal their truth through transformation. And every small habit his son changed was proof that the seed planted that day had taken root deep within him. Soon, the boy started helping others in the village, repairing things, learning skills, listening more than speaking, and people who once ignored him now trusted him, because effort reshapes how the world responds to you, and discipline creates a language everyone understands. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, The boy sat beside his father and said softly that he finally understood something important, that wasting time was not just losing hours, but losing versions of himself he could have become, paths he could have walked, and strengths he could have built. The father nodded, knowing that wisdom arrives quietly when the mind is ready, and replied that time never punishes anyone. It simply reflects who we choose to be, returning to us exactly what we invest into it. From that day forward, the boy lived with awareness, not fear, understanding that every moment carries a choice, and every choice shapes a future, whether we notice it or not, because life is not changed in one dramatic decision, but in the silent discipline of daily actions. So remember this: time does not belong to yesterday, and it is not promised tomorrow. It exists only now, waiting patiently for your decision, and what you choose to do with this moment will quietly decide who you become next. With each passing season, the boy's understanding of time matured, not as a concept spoken about by others, but as a living force he could feel shaping his days, because he realized that time was not something that chased him anymore, but something that responded to how he showed up for life, rewarding consistency and exposing negligence without judgment, simply through results. He noticed that the more attention he gave to his actions, the quieter his mind became, and in that silence he discovered clarity, a clarity that allowed him to see how every wasted hour of his past had not been harmless, but had slowly stolen confidence, direction, and belief in himself, while every hour now used with intention rebuilt those same qualities brick by brick. There were days when old habits tried to return, moments when comfort whispered promises of ease and distraction tempted him to drift again. But now he understood something crucial. Discipline was not punishment, it was protection, a shield against regret, and every time he chose effort over avoidance, he strengthened a version of himself that could no longer be ignored. People in the village began asking him for advice, not because he spoke loudly, but because his life spoke for him, showing that transformation does not require grand speeches, only daily respect for one's own time, energy, and potential, something most people neglect while waiting for motivation that never arrives. The boy learned that time reveals truth slowly, exposing excuses, testing patience, and demanding responsibility, and he realized that those who complain about life often do so not because life is unfair, but because they never learned how to use their time with intention and courage. One afternoon, while walking alone, he reflected on how strange it was that time treated everyone equally, yet outcomes were never the same, and he understood that fairness exists in opportunity, not in results, because results belong to those who consistently choose action over comfort. As months turned into years, the boy no longer measured his days by hours alone, but by growth, by effort invested, by lessons learned, and by the quiet pride that came from knowing he had honored the gift given to him each morning when he opened his eyes. He understood that time does not wait for clarity, it rewards movement, and that even imperfect action builds momentum, while hesitation feeds stagnation, and this realization freed him from the fear of failure that once paralyzed him. The father, now older, watched his son with deep gratitude, knowing that the lesson he had once tried to teach was no longer something the boy remembered, but something he lived, breathed, and embodied in every decision he made. The village itself began to change in small ways, inspired not by rules or authority, but by example, because discipline is contagious when it is authentic, and effort creates a ripple effect that words alone never can. The boy eventually understood that time is not an enemy, nor a resource to be exploited, but a mirror that reflects back who we are becoming, showing us honestly whether we are growing or hiding, evolving or repeating, living consciously or drifting unconsciously. He realized that every excuse was simply time disguised as fear, and every delay was a quiet decision to remain the same, while every commitment, no matter how small, was a declaration of self-respect. As life continued unfolding, challenges did not disappear, but his relationship with them changed, because he no longer saw obstacles as interruptions, but as tests of alignment, asking him whether his actions matched his intentions. He learned that time does not respond to desire alone, but to structure, consistency, and courage, and that those who master their days slowly master their lives without needing recognition or applause. In moments of reflection, he often thought about how many people wait for the perfect moment to begin, not realizing that the perfect moment is created by beginning, and that time only reveals its value to those willing to engage with it fully. Years later, when young people came to him with confusion and frustration, asking how to find purpose, He did not give them complex answers. He simply asked them how they were spending their time, because he knew that the truth always lives there. He explained that time does not demand greatness, only honesty, and that when you stop lying to yourself about how you spend your days, transformation becomes inevitable. The boy, now a man, understood deeply that time does not need to be controlled, only respected, and that respect begins with awareness, choice, and responsibility, repeated every single day without shortcuts. And so the lesson continued, not as a story told once, but as a living truth unfolding moment by moment, reminding anyone willing to listen that time is silent, patient, and powerful, shaping destinies not through force, but through consistency, and that those who learn to honor it quietly build lives that no moment ever regrets. As the man grew older, he began to notice something even more subtle about time, something he had not understood in his youth, which was that time does not only shape actions, but also shapes identity, slowly carving who we become through repetition, through what we tolerate, through what we postpone, and through what we choose to confront when it would be easier to look away. He realized that every morning was not simply a new day, but a quiet invitation, asking without words whether he would live intentionally or mechanically, whether he would act consciously or surrender to habit, and that this decision, repeated thousands of times, was what truly separated a fulfilled life from an empty one. There were moments when he looked back at his past and felt a gentle sadness, not of regret, but of awareness, understanding how many versions of himself had never existed because he had once lacked the discipline to protect his time. And this realization did not weaken him, but strengthened his resolve to never again treat a moment as disposable. He saw people around him growing older without growing wiser, repeating the same complaints year after year, blaming circumstances, luck, or others, while never questioning how they were spending their days, and he understood then that time exposes truth not suddenly, but gradually, revealing patterns long before it reveals consequences. As responsibilities increased and life demanded more of him, he learned that being busy was not the same as being purposeful, and that many people confuse movement with progress, filling their hours with noise to avoid facing the silence where real growth begins. He trained himself to sit with that silence, to observe his thoughts without rushing to escape them, and in doing so he discovered that clarity is not found in speed, but in presence, and that when you give time your full attention, it gives direction in return. He noticed how impatience often disguised itself as ambition, pushing people to rush results without laying foundations, while true mastery required patience, consistency, and respect for the natural rhythm of growth that time demands. The man also learned that time does not forgive neglect, not out of cruelty, but out of neutrality, because it simply continues forward, indifferent to excuses, carrying forward the results of whatever seeds were planted, whether intentionally or carelessly. He began teaching others not through lectures, but through questions, asking them how they felt at the end of their days, whether their exhaustion came from effort or avoidance, from creation or distraction, because he knew that these feelings were honest indicators of how time had been used. He understood that discipline was not about controlling every minute, but about aligning actions with values, and that when values are unclear, time becomes fragmented, scattered across distractions that offer comfort but no meaning. There were seasons when life tested him deeply, moments of loss, uncertainty, and fatigue, and in those moments he saw clearly that time does not promise ease, it promises opportunity, and what we do with that opportunity defines the strength we carry into hardship. He realized that suffering becomes heavier when time is wasted, because regret multiplies pain, while effort lightens it, giving meaning even to difficult experiences, transforming obstacles into lessons rather than burdens. As years passed, he became more selective not only with people, but with commitments, conversations, and thoughts, understanding that everything allowed into one's life consumes time, and that guarding time is the same as guarding one's future. He observed that many people fear commitment because it removes the illusion of endless time, forcing them to confront the reality that every yes requires countless no's, and that maturity begins when one accepts this trade without resentment. He learned that rest was not the enemy of productivity, but its ally, and that honoring time also meant honoring the body and mind, allowing recovery so that effort could remain sustainable rather than destructive. He reflected often on how quickly years pass when days are lived unconsciously, and how slowly time seems to move when each moment is inhabited fully, teaching him that presence expands time, while distraction compresses it. He began to see life not as a race, but as a responsibility, where speed mattered far less than direction, and where consistency quietly outperformed intensity that burned bright but brief. He understood that the most dangerous form of waste was not laziness, but postponement, the habit of delaying life under the promise of later. A promised time is under no obligation to keep, and so he lived with a steady awareness, knowing that every choice, however small, was shaping a future he would one day have to inhabit, and that respecting time was not about fear of death, but about love for life, a love expressed through attention, effort, and conscious presence, day after day, moment after moment, without applause, but with deep inner alignment. As years unfolded, he came to understand that time does not only reveal who we are through what we do, but also through what we repeatedly avoid, because avoidance leaves fingerprints just as clear as action, slowly shaping a life that feels busy on the surface but hollow underneath. He noticed how easy it was for people to fill their schedules while neglecting their souls, mistaking exhaustion for progress and distraction for peace, and he understood that time, when misused, does not scream its warnings. It whispers them through dissatisfaction, restlessness, and an unshakable sense of incompleteness. There were moments when he sat alone and reflected on how many lives are lived in anticipation rather than presence, waiting for conditions to improve, for confidence to appear, for permission to be granted, not realizing that time does not reward waiting, it rewards engagement. He saw clearly that confidence is not found before action, but after it, built quietly through repeated commitments honored even when motivation fades, and that time becomes an ally only when one stops negotiating with it. The man learned that clarity is not a destination reached someday, but a byproduct of movement, and that those who demand certainty before acting often spend their lives standing still while time moves on without them. He observed how fear often disguises itself as overthinking, keeping people trapped in endless analysis, convincing them they are preparing when they are actually postponing, and time, indifferent to intention, simply records the absence of action. As responsibilities grew heavier, he discovered that discipline creates freedom not instantly, but gradually, freeing the mind from chaos, freeing the heart from regret, and freeing the future from the weight of neglected potential. He realized that the greatest theft of time does not come from others, but from the stories we tell ourselves to justify staying where we are, stories that feel comforting in the moment but expensive in the long run. He noticed that when time is respected, life simplifies, priorities sharpen, and unnecessary drama fades, because clarity removes the need for constant reaction, replacing it with intentional response. The man also learned that purpose is not something found once and kept forever, but something renewed daily through alignment between values and actions, and when that alignment breaks, time becomes fragmented and energy drains quickly. He began to recognize that the pain of discipline is always temporary, while the pain of regret compounds over time, growing heavier with each missed opportunity and each promise broken to oneself. He understood that time does not require perfection, only honesty, and that progress belongs not to those who never fail, but to those who return quickly to their path without self-betrayal. As he watched younger generations struggle with distraction, comparison, and constant noise, he realized that time had become more available than ever, yet more wasted than ever, diluted across endless inputs that demanded attention but offered no depth. He reflected on how silence had become rare, and how without silence, people lose the ability to hear themselves, making choices based on external pressure rather than inner truth, and time spent this way slowly disconnects a person from their own life. The man learned to protect his mornings, understanding that the first hours of the day shape the tone of everything that follows, and that when time begins intentionally, it tends to unfold with greater coherence. He noticed that small rituals, repeated daily, carry immense power, not because they are dramatic, but because they anchor identity, reminding a person who they are before the world demands something from them. He came to understand that life is not demanding perfection, only participation, and that time does not judge success by scale, but by sincerity, by whether effort reflects true intention. He observed that many people fear slowing down because slowing down reveals truth, and truth demands responsibility, while distraction allows avoidance to feel productive. The man realized that mastery of time is not about rigid control, but about rhythm, knowing when to push, when to pause, when to reflect, and when to act, all guided by awareness rather than impulse. He learned that comparison is one of the fastest ways to waste time, pulling attention away from one's own path and redirecting it toward lives that cannot be lived, and that time spent comparing never returns as growth. As he aged, he no longer chased urgency, understanding that urgency without direction leads to burnout, while calm consistency quietly builds outcomes that last. He reflected often on how moments become memories regardless of how they are lived, and how painful it is to look back at years that blur together because they were never truly inhabited. He realized that living consciously stretches time, making life feel fuller, while living unconsciously compresses it, making decades disappear with little to show beyond fatigue and unanswered questions. The man accepted that time will eventually take everything, but he also understood that this truth is not meant to frighten, but to focus, to sharpen attention, to strip away what does not matter and reveal what does. He learned that when time is honored, even ordinary days gain meaning, because meaning is not created by events, but by presence. And so he continued forward, not rushing, not delaying, not waiting for perfect circumstances, but meeting each day as it arrived, aware that every moment carried weight, direction, and consequence, and that how one lives today quietly decides how one will feel tomorrow, next year, and at the end of life itself, because time remembers everything, especially how we chose to use it.